Well, it's really good to be with you here today. You know, it's interesting as we think about this next generation and we think about their mindset, they're very entrepreneurial. And when we look at the things that are important to them, you know, purpose and significance, we've seen a huge surge of young social entrepreneurs, not necessarily just for profit, but wanting to do activities and projects that actually make a difference. So when, you know, I think about what Stephen is doing here at Concordia, really being on the cutting edge of providing opportunities to really nurture and develop and fulfill the needs of the next generation. And you know, a big thank you to Stephen. In fact, he's the reason that I've been teaching here for about 4 or 5 years as an adjunct. You know, Mel as well, thank you so much for organizing today. That doesn't go unnoticed, and a lot of the leadership happens behind the scenes. So thank you so much for that, and really for the entire Concordia team for just having me here today. So what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is some research that I've been doing over the last few years. I enjoy reading articles about opinions and trends of how people feel, but I've just found when you have hard data, an old mentor of mine at JP Morgan Chase used to always say, she was from Louisiana, so she would say, Jake, the data don't lie. The data don't lie, you know. Maybe that's not a Louisiana accent, but you get the gist. I tried, I practiced and everything on. So having data to kind of back up some claims and really build a foundation on is critically important. So I conducted a study really in looking at this next generation, things that were important to them. How do they take in information? How do they communicate? What offends them? How do they like to be taught? How do they like to be inspired? And I put together a study that I'll make available to you guys. It was published in the Journal for Biblical Perspectives on Leadership. And you can get a little bit of a deeper, or I can just email it to you if you want to email me after the presentation. But it goes much more in depth into the different topics I'll be talking about. To begin, let's talk about what's happened in the United States over the last 100 years, and we can even look into the next 25 years. Let's think about the amount of stimulus or stimuli that kids have faced, or that we've faced, right? We've continued to move from an economy that was very manual, labor-driven, right? You look at the early 1900s, assembly line production, and basically people didn't have to have a lot of education to do specific tasks. Fast forward to today, and critical thinking has become the most marketable commodity. Now there's still a need for manual labor. It's very important. There are certain jobs that are absolutely required, and even robotics and AI needs to be managed by people. But the shift to critical thinking is really superseded everything. So now we look at research analysts. I was doing consulting with a company the other day. They hired an emotional intelligence director, right? Because today, employers are not just looking for what's on the resume. In fact, the resume may get you in the door, but then they put that aside and say, hey, tell me about a time you failed. How did that go for you? And they're looking for demeanor, they're looking for poise, and they're looking for being able, your ability to be able to talk through a situation. We look at globalization, right? The ability where, basically borders have come down, technological, geographical, and people are able to communicate 24/7 around the world. Now think about it. For many of us when we were kids, I had a pen pal in France. And I would write and I would wait a month or two and hopefully get something back. And now, our kids or the youth are connecting, in class really quickly, sending a text or a note to somebody that's in another part of the world. Their ability to be connected has been an advantage, but also a disadvantage in the fact that they see horrible things that are happening in the world that are forming who they are. I had a couple of kids yesterday that I was talking to that were in tears because of the event that happened in Sri Lanka. When I was a kid, I didn't even know where Sri Lanka was. But today they're hyper-connected, they're brilliant, they're very aware of what's going on. We look at technology and AI and nanotechnology, the use of the web, right? In the mid-90s, companies would put up information on the web and we'd go to that site and we'd look things up. And usually it was an address, maybe a phone number, maybe some general information. Today, companies are actually seeking their customers and finding them in the places that they hang out in. So they're no longer just depending on their websites, right? They're going out, they're finding out what are these things called social influencers, and boy, they have a lot of followers. How do we advertise there? How do we connect with them? The environment and ecological sustainability is critical today more than ever, right? And then we get to this idea of the transitioning workforce, and that's kind of where we're going to hone in a little bit more. Right? We have more diversity in the workforce and even in schools than we've had really ever, here, especially here in Southern California. More traditions, more belief systems, more languages. That's impacted the dynamic of this next generation. Okay? The role of women in the workplace. Okay? For the first time in history, there are more women getting bachelor's, master's, and PhDs than men. There are more women moving into mid-level managerial positions more than men. And that's changing the dynamic. And then finally, really what teases us up for today is this whole idea of changes in generational composition. Okay? You know, the reason I fell in love with this is I ran the HR division for JP Morgan Chase for about 15 years. And the one thing that I noticed about newer talent was this idea is they were different than millennials. And we were losing a lot of people. And I was charged with trying to figure out a plan of how do we attract and retain this next generation, because they're slightly different than millennials. So that really sparked my interest early on in trying to see what this looked like in the workplace. And then we went on to look at it a little bit more in education and outside of the workplace. So let's start by looking at what a generation is, okay? You know, in essence, it's just a group of people that grew up around the same time, that had the same influences and the same social events that inspired them. Now today, here's what's different. A young kid here today faces many of the same experiences that maybe a child in Vietnam would face, because they're connected socially, they like the same recording artists, the same music, they're exposed to the same news events. Versus if you were an 18-year-old here in the United States in the early 70s or late 60s, your experiences might be very different than a youth at the same age in Vietnam. So the window has opened globally when we look at generations. You know, depending on who you talk to, you know, if you look at the Pew Research Center, if you look at, syntax, depending on where you look at, they have slightly different variations for the definitions. But let's just make sure we know, going in who we're talking about here. So the silent generation, they were around during World War II, right? They fought in World War II. They grew up during the Depression. So a lot of them were savers, right? Very conservative. Many of the men came back from war, and they integrated a lot of the philosophies that we see in the corporate workspace now. They brought that in. CEO, COO, managerial hierarchies, span of management. All those things were really, really fine-tuned when these individuals came back from the war. They had boomer children. And what's interesting is the children that we have tend to go the opposite of where their parents went, right? So don't think it wasn't just us or you, right? It actually happened. So boomers that were born between 46 and 64, in their youth, there was Woodstock in the 60s, and I'm not saying it's a case for everything, but there was a unique environment that they grew up in. Okay, then as they grew older, and they grew up in a very competitive environment because they were the largest generational cohort at the time, they then had children that were Generation X. Okay, and what was interesting is Generation X, I'm a Gen Xer, and what we found is a lot of Gen Xers grew up in broken homes because their boomer parents, there was a high divorce rate. It was close to 50%. It was the highest that we had ever seen in the United States. A lot of parents were absent in the lives of Gen Xers. In fact, the term latchkey kid is a Gen X term where, like my wife, when she was little, she would come home after school and she would have a piece of yarn with a key on it, and she would get home and unlock the door herself, get herself a snack, work on her homework until mom came home. And that was very, very common in the life of Xers. Then we became parents, and we went the opposite way. So generally speaking, we said, you know what, we don't want that. We're going to hover over our parents like you would not believe, right? All right, so we got piano lessons, and then we got yogurt with Joey, and then we're going to have lunch with Tama. Then we got a play date, and then we're going to have dinner, and we compensated in a lot of different ways, okay? And then Gen Xers and Millennials started having children that were Gen Zers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we've even seen the parenting style change now for Gen Zers. We now see parents, instead of hovering, we were just talking about this a moment ago, they call them lawnmower parents or curbing parents. You guys know curbing in the Olympics, the little thing with the ice where they throw that big rock and then the people are out in front trying to do that? That's what parents are doing. They're kind of getting out in front, letting the child move forward, but they're clearing the path to make it easier for them, right? So we're seeing more of that. I mean, the college bribery scandal is a perfect example of that. And in many cases, the kids didn't even know that things were going on with their parents, that they were doing that, okay? So that's basically the general cohorts to give you an idea of the groups. What's interesting about this is previous generations used to span about 20 to 25 years. That was enough time where there was enough experiences that you could say, hey, we ended a generation and we're beginning a new one. But what's happening now is that there's so much activity and so much stimuli that it's being compressed. And what people used to receive in 25 years, they're getting in 15 years. And that's good when it comes to some intelligence and learning how to deal with certain situations. But in the mind of a young child or developing youth, that can cause some serious mental issues too, and the pressures that come with that. So that's called age compression, and that's what we're seeing. So here's a based on Statista, kind of the distribution of the population by millions. So as you can see, there's about 86.43 million Gen Zers out there now. This is not the working population. This is kind of just the general population. What we just saw this year, actually, is the millennial population actually bypassed the boomer population in the workforce. Boomers are retiring at the rate of 10,000 per day. And there was a lot of boomers. So we've seen for the first time in history kind of a shift now and a succession plan to the next generation, where the millennials are now, the big one. The Gen Xers, us Gen Xers, we're kind of like the Jan Brady. We're kind of like the middle child, like what's happening around us, For you Gen Xers, you feel me, all right? All right, and then there's by percentage, that's the distribution, okay? All right, so who is Gen Z? Who are they? Well, they're the first generation to be completely connected to the internet and to their smart devices. Okay, millennials they were at the tail end. They might have been a little bit more familiar with they were connected with their email and maybe internet was there, but it was in its early stages. Nowadays, that is just basically part of what you experience as a youth. You do not know a life without the smart device. In fact, we were having dinner with some friends a couple years ago, not that long ago, and really, as we were talking, they had a 3-year-old Gen Zer at the time, and they said, he was running around, he's a little rambunctious, and they said, let's just give him the iPad. And I'm like, he's only like 3, does he know how to use it? He got in there, put in the password, he was swiping, he was playing all kinds of games, and really took us by surprise, right? So smart devices are part of their life. They're extremely competitive. And as employers, as leaders of Gen Z, we got to provide environments that promote both autonomy and collaboration. Millennials liked a lot of collaboration, more than autonomy. Gen Xers, we kind of came up with we're going to work from home, we're just going to telecommute, right? We came up with Casual Friday, jeans and a t-shirt, you're welcome, right? And the tensions between Generation Z and Boomers was very, very heavy. Because Boomers grew up in a time where there was heavy competition. They worked very, very hard and they looked great at work. And Gen Xers came in really casual. I'm like, I could get the same amount of work done in the same amount of time from home. And there was just questions about loyalty in the workplace and that type of thing that caused issues. You look at Gen Z, they are also very competitive. They are less optimistic than millennials. They're a little bit more real. Why? They grew up in the recession of 2008. They grew up in homes where they saw families or their parents lose their home, or friends and family members. They were impacted by that. they tend to be a little bit more financially conscious as a result of that. I was talking to a group of people just a couple of days ago, and the gentleman was talking about Gen Zers, and he was saying, you know what? Why are they moving back home? They need to. When I was, and it was a boomer, when I was their age, I had 3 jobs and I was paying for my own way to college. Why is it that they can't do that? And obviously, circumstances are different today. But here was the interesting thing: is when I've talked to Gen Zers and I've asked them that question, you know what they've said? They're not moving home because they want to be back home for the sake of being home. They're very conscious of, hey, you know what, I got a lot of student loans I got to pay back. If I need to get somewhere, I can Uber on demand. I don't need to buy a car. I don't need insurance payments. I don't need monthly payments at the moment. So you're seeing a lot more financial conscious decisions. They're very globally minded, and as we're talking about being shaped, they're seeing a lot of bad stuff. You know, they're being considered the mass shooting generation, was a term I recently heard. So they're being identified by a time period when there's a lot of death and that type of thing. Okay, just a couple more thoughts. They're health and financially conscious, right? They really help create they're leaders in the organic purchasing area, right? They won't have enough to put gas in their car, but the avocado toast and the Whole Foods purchase, that's going to happen. And it's just a really interesting dynamic to see, right? I can't sacrifice my Starbucks, right? My white chocolate mocha, 3 pumps of this, no caffeine, extra that, you know. And as a result of all the stimulus that Generation Z is facing, attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Okay, I think the millennial average attention span research showed was about 22 seconds. Okay, it's closer to 8 to 10 with Gen Zers. So what does that mean for you as an employer, as a leader of Gen Zers? You have to adjust to that, because gone are the days that we used to say, we used to be able to say, well, if you don't like working here, you can go work somewhere else. Well, you say that to a Gen Zer now, and then you'll be up on Yelp, on Glassdoor, everywhere. They'll be explained that, and it could tarnish your reputation. So employers are now thinking, how do I attract and retain? How do I find that balance in an environment to keep employees happy, but also make sure that it's financially viable? Some companies go the extreme, like Google and companies like that. They actually have sleeping pods on lunch. You can go and close the sleeping pod and sleep for half an hour. Right? They have bikes on campus. Some companies have a physician on site or daycare, right? They're doing things to attract the next generation. All right, we talked about the curbing and the lawnmower approach, okay? I'm gonna show you a quick video, and this, will give you an idea of what when we talk about Gen Zers, putting a lot of those qualities together. I want you to see this video. This is a video of Grace Vanderwaal. She was a contestant a few years ago on America's Got Talent. Okay? And she displays a lot of these things, because sometimes you have to actually see something to be able to have it solidify in your mind. So let me show you this video. This is a typical, middle of the road Gen Zer demonstrating these type of things. And there's a lot of humility in this as well. So let's take a look at this.
Hi, young lady. What is your name?
Grace.
Grace, you're a beautiful young lady, you know that?
Thank you, I guess.
How old are you?
12.
Are you excited to be here?
It's crazy.
What are you going to sing?
I'm singing an original.
Really?
Yes.
What's it about?
It's about me.
And are the people at school behind you supporting you?
Most of my friends don't really know I sing.
So they don't know you're here?
No.
You believe that you can win?
Well, I mean, miracles can happen, so possibly.
The stage is yours. Good luck.
Don't play by the rules of the game, so you say. I'm just trying, so I heard you on my side. to get thrown in an ocean of people. Please don't ask me any that I don't know my name. I don't play by the rules of the game, so you say. I'm just trying, just trying. I now know my name. I don't play by the rules of the game, so you say. I'm not trying, but I'm trying to find my way.
She ended up getting the golden buzzer that day, and she ended up winning the whole event, competing against people twice, 3 times her age that were very, very talented. But you could see a lot in that. She wrote an original song. A lot of people didn't even know that she played. The lyrics were her own. And when she won, she was very, very humble about it. So it's just a very, very unique thing that we see with that. Okay, let's continue. All right, here's a couple of other terms that they have for Gen Zers. The Throwback Generation. Well, why is that? Because they're finding with Gen Z, they're turning back to a lot of the same things that previous generations used to value. For example, a lot of Gen Zers are collecting vinyl records. I don't know if you guys know that. Like my son and his friends, they'll go out to shops, and I get to go hang out with them, and I can't believe the stuff they're looking at. And I'm thinking, like, I threw that away 20 years ago, you know. I should have kept it, because now that Journey album's worth $35, you know. It's unbelievable. They're also returning back to face-to-face communication, but leveraging technology, using Zoom and Skype. When I walk around campus, I see students talking to their parents and their friends, and they got their earbuds on, and they're talking. So they are connecting, and face-to-face, they're returning to that. They prefer to make a phone call than using email, whereas millennials really just prefer texting. So as leaders, it's important that we realize that. You know, I've seen, you know, just with my students, office hours are very valuable to Gen Zers. They want to find out what's going on. Okay, let me move to a couple other things. They were shaped by, you know, the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the recession, the social media boom, right? The rise of Amazon and Alibaba, high-profile suicides. And what's interesting is I was reading an article from the Center of Disease Control today. For the first time in history, in the last year or two, we've actually seen a gradual decline now in the United States of the average life expectancy. For the last 100 years, it was going up because people were living longer, they were taking care of themselves, they were healthier. And I was thinking, well, maybe that's because, you know, wow, for that number, the whole number to be skewed, we may have a lot of boomers that are, you know, passing away. But that wasn't what it was. It was youth suicide, drug overdose, the opioid crisis. I mean, this is a big issue. And to curb the entire number of the United States, imagine how many people that would drive, you know, that needs to occur with to drive that number. Okay, and again, we're starting to see some of the results of some, we talked about communication. So that brings me to this idea of relationship, the importance of relationship to Generation Z. They value relationships, okay? They value a coaching style connection. So if you walk up to a Gen Zer and say, you need to do this, you need to do that, you know, you need to get this done, you probably won't get the response and the efficiency and the partnership that you want. But if you walk up to a Gen Zer and say, hey, listen, I'm working on this project. I would like you to work on this piece of it, and this is why. When you do this, this is how it can contribute to the success of the project. What do you think? And they want to be part of something bigger. Gen Z will also ask a lot of questions and push back. Not because they're being disrespectful, but they're asking those questions because they want to understand what's going on and how they can help. Other generations interpret that as resistance and tension and will act appropriately with Gen Z in that space. So we have to be very, very conscious of that. They want to know why. That's a valuable thing to be able to say, hey, this is why, and then they can say, wow, that's great, and then they retain it more. Okay, we are seeing, you know, especially for the older Gen Zers that are around, you know, 22, 24 years old. Generally speaking, compared to other generations at their same age, lower marriage rates. Okay, and we're also seeing a heavy reduction in teen pregnancies, just generally speaking. Okay, very, very entrepreneurial. And again, to Stephen's point, if you want to lead in this space, you need to give them the room to be creative. You need to partner with them in their passion to be entrepreneurial. And in fact, like I said, a lot of these opportunities aren't necessarily financially driven. There's a Gen Zer in Sweden that came up with a method of collecting trash in the oceans, and it's expected to clean up like the 5 most congested pockets of the ocean in the next like 5 or 10 years. There's another Gen Zer out of Texas that designed a way to partner with a company to print homes in El Salvador where people can actually live. It actually prints homes, and they're on the cutting edge of that. And that's just a few examples of what we're seeing, but they're very, very attuned to gun violence. Philanthropy is important to them, volunteering is important, and those type of things. Okay? They value education. Education is important to them. Now, if I'm teaching in a class, I no longer have in my syllabus, you need to put your cell phone away. I have to understand that that's just part of who they are. In fact, they suffer from nomophobia. It's now diagnosed. Nomophobia is the fear of being separated from your phone or smart device for like more than 10 minutes, right? I mean, think about it. When your battery runs out, do you get a little anxious? We do. At that age, it gets really, really concerning, right? So that's you know. So instead, what do? I leverage technology in the classroom. I do fun Kahoot videos, I'll show videos, I'll do word clouds where they can participate. So we use that, and they highly value that. So when I do consulting for companies and we update, you know, training modules, we look to incorporate those type of things to keep them engaged. So it's not just a check mark in the box, but it's something that inspires them because they are highly talented, ladies and gentlemen. They are highly talented, okay? We talked about some of these challenges, right? Increased levels of suicide, higher levels of attention deficit disorder, right? Increased use of Schedule II narcotics. So and let me put it this way, the casual use of drugs like Adderall and Dexedrine. There are times where I have seen youth say, hey, listen, we got to study late tonight. Hey, you know, I got an Addy. We'll take an Addy, we'll study just fine. And they're talking about it like it's a Jolly Rogers candy. It's a Schedule II narcotic. And the pressure that this youth has to get into universities and that type of thing, they're doing anything they can to get that competitive edge. And it's something that we have to be very, very aware of. They suffer from social media addiction disorder, right? Always being connected. And also, that also includes their value, their net worth, or their self-worth. Oftentimes, especially for the younger kids, is dependent on how many likes they get on the postings that they put up, how people respond to their social media. Their view of the world depends on social media, okay? We've heard FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. That's a little bit on the lighter side, but it's a true concept. And they suffer from what we call secondhand terrorism. And that's, you've been around it so much, you've seen it on TV. Some kids have even experienced it, you know, the drills in their school, that when they hear the words or they hear guns go off or something happens, that they immediately react as if it was a terrorist event. And they're always on edge. We need to be aware of that. We got to be able to help them with employee assistance programs and good counseling at universities and that type of thing. So how do we lead them? A, lead by example. Lead by example. Do what you say you're going to do and follow through. Allow them to have a voice. And most of the time, you'll be surprised by what comes out of their mouth. And once in a while, you will get that sense of immaturity where they might ask a question that you might be like, well, you know what, if you've been around another 2 or 3 years, you would understand that. But they're just naturally curious because they want to make a difference. Okay, we talked about providing a challenging environment. If you're going to lead Gen Z and you want their respect and you want them to follow you, make sure you know what you're talking about. Because there have been times in class where I'll mention something, or even on the job and training, and I'll say, hey, so the percentage of this is 87.5, and then somebody says, oh, you know what? It's no, it's actually 89.4, and they looked it up really quickly while I was in class. They will validate what you say, and if you're off, the credibility can start to go if you're not careful. We also have to help them understand that Wikipedia and Google is not fact, right? Oftentimes they think, well, Wikipedia said this, so it's got to be true. And we got to help them really understand that that's not always the case. We talked about being a coach, leveraging technology. Again, we want to help them with their entrepreneurship passions. We need to help them. They value diversity and inclusion, and that's a good thing. Okay? They are less prejudiced and are more willing to work across cultural lines than previous generations. And that's a good thing for a company. We talked about the why. They want leaders that are open, authentic, honest, and being able to say, hey, I struggle with that too, and this is kind of what I do. It's okay to be vulnerable. Gen Z values that in their leadership, in the people they want to follow. And we talked about some voices and that type of thing. If you're an instructor or you're working in an environment where Gen Zs are your customer, a strategy that, again, leverages technology that's collaborative and autonomous is important. All right? So ask yourself these questions. In what area do I connect well with Gen Z? In what areas does it come natural to me? And hey, I do that. And you know what? In what area do I need to change? And that's going to be the key in leading Generation Z, is our ability to say, hey, you know what? I don't need to change my roles and my responsibilities. The job still needs to get done. But how do I adjust my style? It's just like your kids. You treat them equally, but not the same. Right? One might be a little bit more sensitive. One likes a little bit more of a direct approach. That's what we also have to be thinking about when we're dealing with the different generational groups. And then lastly, I just leave you with this thought of, ask yourself, what 2 things do I need to do differently this next week, this next month, in order to connect with Generation Z? Okay? And that's all I have for you. There's my contact information. If you want to send me a line, I'd be more than happy to send you the deck of slides, and I'd be more than happy to send you a comprehensive a research report that I wrote that goes into detail on each one of these with some more tips. All right? Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.